The best of Money Matters. Right Business.
Welcome to this month's The Peak Special right here on The Right Business. I'm Hongbin Jeong. Now today we're spotlighting a story that's less about scaling fast and more about making meaning. One page, one stitch, one book at a time. We'll be looking at Bespoke Arts, a small but deeply intentional studio founded by Yang Shihui, one of the last practicing bookbinders in Singapore. Through her workshops, bespoke commissions, and quiet acts of preservation, Yang is keeping the tradition of hand-sewn bookbinding alive in an age dominated by screens and speed. It's a story not just about craftsmanship, but about creative resilience and what it takes to sustain a niche analog business in a digital world. And to share more about her story, what Yang's journey reveals about the creative economy in Singapore, and why Bespoke Arts might just be the right business, joining us today is Zat, Editor-in-Chief of The Peak Singapore. Hi Zat, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Zat, you recently featured Yang Shihui, the founder of Bespoke Arts and one of the last practicing bookbinders here in Singapore. Could you start by telling us more about Yang and what drew you to explore this particular story?
So, as you have mentioned, Yang Shihui is the founder of Bespoke Arts, and she is in fact one of the last practicing bookbinders in Singapore. My team and I, we were drawn to her story because in so many ways, she embodies the quiet resilience of traditional crafts in a highly digital first world. In fact, when my editor pitched this story to me, it took a while for me to understand what bookbinding is.
Right.
Because most of the time, we don't really understand the process that goes behind creating the books, right? But more than that, I think her journey from the outright rejection by local printers to training in London and then founding her own studio speaks to a kind of creative stubbornness that I find compelling and also is something that the Peak likes to encourage and fight for.
Very interesting. Well, Zat, from your conversations with her then, what do you think sets Bespoke Arts apart, not just as a creative studio, but as a business built around a nearly forgotten craft? What's the heart of what she's trying to preserve or revive?
I think based on the conversation that I've had with my team on this exact topic and how we are so excited about the way this story can unfold, right? I think that in itself speaks a lot about how this kind of craft in today's age and time really gets a lot of people very excited. But for Shihui, Bespoke Art is not just a studio, it's actually her own way of safeguarding the tactile and deliberate experience of hand-making book. So while it is easy to say that, she is preserving a skill, she is preserving a kind of way to create something by hand, what she is actually fighting for, right, and what she is reviving is a slower, more intentional form of creation. And what she does reminds us that books are, in effect, physical objects, right, with their own stories, and they're not just vessels for content.
Well, the Peak has also positioned Bespoke Arts not just as an art practice, but as a kind of quiet rebellion against digital fatigue, mass production, and creative constraints. So what was Yang's perspective on the difference between traditional craftsmanship versus modern craftsmanship?
I mean, the essence of the question in itself speaks a lot about how we view or how my team views this profile. And for Shihui, what she is doing, in fact, is resisting the homogenizing effects of digital convenience and mass production. It is the thing that makes everything looks the same because there is no physical identity or physical marker when it comes to things in the digital space. But for books, each book is a singular act. Each handmade book is a singular act. And it's actually proof that creativity can be as much about the process as the product. and that there's actually a lot of value in embracing imperfection and slowness in a hyper optimized world.
And as a maker here, how does she stay rooted in tradition while still making her practice feel relevant, contemporary, and connected to today's conversations around creativity?
So the undeniable fact is that Shihui is very rooted, right, in the work that she does and in the craft that she champions. But more importantly, from what I saw, she stays rooted by respecting historical methods, but also adapting them for what the world needs today. Be it something that is a little bit faster or something that is a little bit smaller, there is a sense of adaptation there that is further enhanced and elevated by the way she collaborates with contemporary artists to create things such as, pocket guides, sculptural works, and also inventing new tools when resources fall short. In effect, her practice is actually a kind of living conversation between the past and the present.
Your team also unpacked Young's early challenges by being turned away by printers. You've mentioned this earlier as well, building her own tools and pursuing a degree abroad when local opportunities were lacking. So what stood out to you in her story that speaks to bigger issues within Singapore's creative ecosystem?
I think creative constraints make creative or an artist more creative. If we were given everything on the plate, right, we have very little room to experiment and make mistakes. However, her experience, her early setbacks, being turned away by printers and the lack of local opportunities, is at its core a highlight of how Singapore's creative ecosystem itself can be very rigid and risk-averse. Her decision to study abroad and later build her own tools, in fact, underscores the need for more institutional support for unconventional creative paths, which there is a little bit of irony in that, because if creative constraints make us more creative, I think the other side of the coin is that it can be too rigid if not given room to breathe.
Definitely. I mean, there's also a strong entrepreneur arc here. Yang started her own studio, runs regular workshops, takes on bespoke commissions, even partners with illustrators to create custom stationery. So what were your thoughts on the business side of her practice, and what did you learn about how she sustains a niche craft in a market that doesn't always value slow, handmade work?
So there is a particular business aspect that is quite smart in the way Yang works, and that for me is diversification. So she does not just do one thing, which is book binding. She actually do a lot of other things on the fringes, which supports the main core of what she is creating. So how she sustains her practice is through, as I said earlier, diversification. So she's running regular workshops. She takes bespoke commissions. She partners with other creatives. And that in turn turns her niche into an advantage and also sort of like a jumping board, right, for everything else to happen, at least creatively. And it does attract many clients who value craftsmanship and story, and in fact further proof that even in a fast-paced market, there's actually room for the deliberate and the handmade.
Right. Well, Zat, speaking of her workshops here, what does her workshop entail and what kind of audience has she attracted to her workshops? Are they creatives themselves or people who are just as passionate as her in preserving traditional practices?
So her workshops are very hands-on sessions, and that is par for the course. And I don't think it can be done any other way. But in the hands-on sessions, what participants learn are things like binding techniques, like the French link stitch or the Japanese step binding. And the audience is a very interesting mix of aspiring creatives, artists, people drawn to the therapeutic and mindful act of making. And it is very important, right, this last segment of people who is always looking for a respite from this very busy world, this very crowded and very intense digital life. And there is a sort of very meditative, very slow aspect to connecting with analog practices. It really is something for people to experience for themselves.
Right, definitely. Well, one of the most fascinating parts of your piece here is how Young talks about form and function, and that's through how she considers the experience of a book, from the feel of it to, how it's meant to be used. Whether it's a pocket-sized guidebook or a sculptural art piece, the binding method always connects back to the story. So, Zah, what did that reveal to you about her design philosophy and how she collaborates with other creatives to bring ideas to life? And did she share any projects that really stayed with you?
So, Young's approach, right, to design is rooted in an almost obsessive attention to the way objects are experienced in daily life. So, for her, a book isn't just a place for words or images to stay, but it is a tactile encounter. And it is something to be carried, something to be opened, something to be turned in the hands and remembered through its feel as much as its content. So, she insists on understanding who will use the book and how it will move through the world, which explains why she matches binding technique and materials to a book's intended function. So, for instance, a tourist guide, must be pocket-sized and lightweight, whereas an artist's book might demand a method that turns the object itself into a sort of sculpture. But when collaborating with other creatives, right, Young's process is always deeply dialogic and iterative. So she listens to their intentions and often invents or adapts techniques to suit the brief. The project that lingers with me most, right, is the Diamond Hire commission, where she created a hand-bound folder that mimicked the shirt of a school uniform, complete with a plastic name tag. So for me, right, that is the perfect example of her philosophy. Form and function collapsing into a single narrative gesture, and where the physicality of the book is inseparable from its story. This is definitely something that digital media can never ever replicate.
Yeah, it definitely cannot. Well, to wrap up our conversation here today, Zod, what do you think makes spaced book arts and Young's practice the right kind of business?
At its core and philosophically, right, bespoke arts doesn't tender to trends. And that's quite rare in today's world, right? Because it offers a special, a very unique embodied alternative to digital fatigue. So what Shihui has done is build a practice that is slow, that is personal, that is quietly subversive, and its success is proof that there is still appetite for objects and experiences shaped by human hands and the imagination.
Thank you so much, Zod, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That was Zod, Editor-in-Chief of The Peak Singapore. This has been The Right Business with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.